I'll speak a little bit about the book. The thing with slashers is that they don't talk. They are unknown and unknowable. They are like a force of nature that kind of intrudes through life. They are anonymous terror. And you know what? When you think about that, maybe there is a reflection of life. You know, when I started doing this, I had no intention of doing anything serious. I had no intention of saying anything. There was a time as a writer when I thought I had something to say. I thought I had something meaningful to say, and I've tried to get away from that. This book was supposed to be just wicked, nasty fun. You know, crazy, dial it up to 11, just go hog wild. But like the thing is that when you've got slashers within the book, they don't talk to you, they don't relate, they're barely seen, they just kind of show up and bad things happen. And in a sense, that's actually life, isn't it? That so much of what life goes on, so much of that is so much more horrible than anything slashers could do. You look at, say, the genocides in Gaza or the Sudan. You look at, imagine being a fisherman off the coast of Venezuela, and you get randomly blown up just for being there. So much of what happens to us is impersonal, it's faceless, it is an anonymous world that just kind of goes in. And I think maybe slashers are a reflection or a metaphor for that. And so, you know, maybe I did have something to say after all, even if I tried not to. Anyway, this is the presentation, and now I think we go on to the Q&A. Yes, she held up the sign. So we're going to go on to the Q&A. If anyone wants to discuss the book or discuss writing or slashers or wants to know who Ed Gein is or wants to hear stories of real-life slashers or strange things, or what I was trying for. Yo, got a question?
Hi. Can you tell us about your artwork on your book?
That's
and
important.
You mentioned somebody named Nim.
Nim,
Was
yes.
it a corporation or an individual?
Well,
Can you speak to that, please?
Okay. I don't know if I should use his real name.
Okay.
But he goes by the name of Nim Productions, and he is a friend of Dean Today's, and he was an artist. And he's done all sorts of things. Some of his work has been up at the Forks. And he got enthusiastic about the project way, way back when with Dean, and between them, they produced a series of sketches of different slashers. It was all free form. You know, he was just making them all up on his own inspiration. And that became part of Dean's portfolio. And then when we were doing the book, Dean used that artwork to design the covers for us. He designed some really great covers. He designed some posters, putting those works together, and of course the video. And the individual artworks actually show up as punctuation within the book. And, you know, we've created some backstories for some of these characters, like the killer clown who joins one circus after another, and you don't realize he's doesn't belong there until, you know, it leaves town and you find the bodies, or the guy with the welding helmet, or, you know, the guy with the gas mask. They're characters who fit the stalker mythos. I believe that Nim Productions has done a couple of magazines or zines, and I've seen one, and he's just a really good artist, and I am so thrilled to have his work in my book. It adds so much more to it. Yeah.
In the prologue we just saw, are the vampires really the good guys?
Oh, that's an interesting question, and I'll answer it this way. No matter who or what, the slashers are always worse, you know? So the vampires see themselves as the good guys, and the one thing I'll say is that, yeah, the slashers are worse. You know, there's, in the last scene with the Hungry Hungry Hippos, you know, one of the god hippos is saying, "Why have you done this to us? We were going to save the world." And they're cannibal hippos. They do horrible things. They rip people in half. You know, they're infantile monsters. And the squad is worse. When they encounter the Wendigo are just minding their own business. The squad is worse. You know, there's evil, and then down here, there's the squad. They're what evil is going, yeah, you guys are going way too far now. So, yeah. Bruce.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier, like slasher movies as the basis for ideas for these characters. And I was kind of wondering, since you've probably seen more than enough of those movies, and I think it's probably healthy for anyone. And that's your basis for knowing what to do with those characters. What was your basis for knowing what to do with the military characters in the book?
I think the basis for the military characters was people who had to deal with this kind of absolute evil. I saw the squad as basically radioactive. And, you know, like we were all monkeys, and so monkeys find this shiny little pebble that's, you know, like a bit of plutonium, and they think, wow, this is cool. So they start gathering little bits of plutonium together until they've got this big shiny pile, and they don't understand why all the monkeys are dying and their hair is falling out and stuff like that. And that's basically what the squad is. So there's a lot of emphasis that everyone who's around the squad is being affected by their evil, their toxicity in the support system of soldiers and guards and researchers that are all around. The suicide rate is astronomical. The general has cancer. Everybody is losing their humanity just by being close to them. And so the general, as a character, is a guy who's been handed a really unpleasant job dealing with something monstrous. And he does his job. But it's taking its toll. And then the lieutenant comes along, and she's also trying to cope with something that can't be coped with. So that's basically where they are. It's discipline in the face of horror. And they have to cope with it. And they have to try and hold on to their humanity as they cope with it.
Is there no hope?
The reviewer surprised me from Amazing Stories, and he said, yeah, this ends as a complete downer, there's no hope, and okay, yes, nobody survives. When the squad comes to town, everyone's dead. The good, the bad, the innocent, there's just no survivors left. But at the end of the book, the final line is there's some guy who, I'm not giving you a spoiler or anything. Well, maybe I am, but we'll do it anyway. There's a final line. There's been two characters who've been following along this whole thing, and they're trapped, and one of them is a teenager named Jesus, or Jesus. And so at the end, they're encountering one of the squad members, and they're being allowed to get away or to confront it. And the protagonist, or the closest thing to a protagonist, said, the last line is, so he turned to follow Jesus. And that's got a double meaning. So yeah, that's about as hopeful as it gets. Everybody else is dead, often in really spectacularly horrible ways. I mean, I've got this one scene where there's a Ferris wheel at the Colombian drug lord's compound. And during the time when everything is just going to hell and going wild, they turn a corner, and that Ferris wheel is just rolling down the street, and there's people strapped to it screaming. And it was such a great scene. I wanted to do so much more, but there was so many more horrible things I had to do as well. So if you kind of get an idea where, okay, a scene like that is getting crowded out. So I don't know if there's no hope, but I think there's a lot of fun to be had. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Oh, yo.
Yeah, obviously, these are the darkest of darkest stories. I'm wondering on a personal level, as you wrote it and as you finished it, was there anything that you wrote that surprised and shocked yourself?
Oh, constantly. I was just giggling and laughing like a maniac through the whole thing. I had so much fun writing this. Was there anything that absolutely shocked me? Well, just maybe how far I was willing to go. There's a scene in Centipedes where the lieutenant is trying to save two children. This is her idea. She's going to save someone. She's been told nobody gets out alive. And she's got these two children in tow, and she's trying to save them, doing everything she can, and they're both in deep states of shock and trauma. And she doesn't succeed, and at one point she turns, one of the kids that she's trying to save turns a corner and starts waving to her. And as she watches, she realizes he's dead, and one of the slashers, one of the killers, has actually stuck his hand up inside from behind and is basically using him as like a ventriloquist puppet. And she's going, oh, okay, I guess I don't save anyone here. So, yeah, okay, maybe that was a bit shocking. I mean, really, you really don't want me to make me go through a list of just bizarre, horrible things I did. We'll be here for a while.
And you'll ruin the book.
Yes.
Every genre responds or contributes to or is shaped by some psychic or social need in its potential readers. What role do you see horror, the genre horror, responding to, I don't mean playing to, but responding to in society as a whole?
I think, actually, that I can make a couple of responses to that, so I'll do them one after the other. One is that I think horror is really about metaphor. And I'll use the example of the werewolf, which I've used before. Back in the 1930s, when Larry Talbot was the werewolf, it was huge. Women came to the theater and they would sit through 3 or 4 showings. It fascinated them. And Larry Talbot was just some guy who was a nice, regular guy, except that he had this problem that once in a while he would go he would just get out of control and he'd get hairy and rough and he'd hurt the people that he loved. And afterwards, when he was fine, he'd feel bad about it, but then a month later he'd do it all again. And I think that Larry Talbot was a metaphor for alcoholism, for an alcoholic, for the really destructive social effects of alcoholism. At a time in our history when we didn't really have tools to confront it. We didn't have Alcoholics Anonymous or the medical assessments of alcoholism as a disease. It was a social conversation we were struggling with the Prohibition movement, but we didn't really have any way to confront emotionally in our lives. We were living that. And it's interesting that once we as a society, after we're making films like The Lost Weekend, as these groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step programs come up, as groups like Al-Anon come up, the werewolf loses his power. The mask sort of empties out. And I think that what horror is, as a genre, is about confronting or dealing with things that we cannot face directly, like teenagers, the impersonal world of the future, all these desires, all these uncertainties. Well, you just stick an anonymous guy with a mask wandering around. So I think horror is about the things that we can't talk about directly, not in our lives. So we stick a mask on it, we make it a metaphor, and that enables us to kind of talk about it, think about it, that we tell ourselves a story about being able to cope with it. Now the other thing, have any of you heard of Maslow's hierarchy?
Yeah.
Okay, for those who haven't, Maslow's hierarchy basically said there's a pyramid of need, and that people who are at the bottom of the pyramid are living there, and that the further you go up the pyramid, the more our needs change. So the basic bottom of the pyramid is food. If you are hungry, nothing else matters. Once you have your hunger satisfied, you go to the next level of the pyramid, shelter, and then security, and then all the way up until at the top of the pyramid, you are at self-actualization. And I've always seen literature as basically for people at the top of the pyramid. Literature asks questions about identity, about self-actualization, about people who really don't have other problems. I found literature used to drive me crazy because it was about middle-aged people, middle-class people, or upper-middle-class people who had no problems in their lives, and they had like angst. I don't care about your angst, okay? You have a summer house. You have like 3 cars in your garage. You have like a trust fund. There's nothing wrong with your life as far as I can see. You know, when I was struggling to pay the rent and, you know, wondering if I needed to buy money for groceries, it wasn't working for me. But if you move down to, say, away from literature, to, say, a genre like horror, horror is about insecurity. It's about people who maybe are afraid of walking home at night, people who are afraid of losing their house, people who are afraid of not being able to make the rent, people who are afraid for their children. And so it's about people at the bottom, the working class, the poor, the sort of lower middle class, people who are struggling and who know that they are struggling and who know the consequences of not succeeding. And so with a lot of these movies, what you have is layered, a kind of metaphor of people who are experiencing desperation, genuine desperation in their lives, the lower end of Maslow's hierarchy, where you need shelter, you need food, you need security, you need to get all these things together. And so I think that's really the audience for horror, that where it affects you emotionally. There was a movie that Stephen King writes about called The Amityville Horror. Mm-hmm. And he went to that movie, and the interesting thing was it wasn't teenagers. It was all middle-aged people in the movie theater. And they were watching this obsessively. And the Amityville Horror was about basically this family who'd ended up with a money pit that was just wrecking their lives. And there's a scene where they lose the mortgage payment, and the guy is just going crazy. And the implication is the evil spirit has stolen their mortgage payment. He's just going crazy, searching the house, going, where is it? Where is it? And the people watching were riveted because they didn't have ghosts in their house, but some of them had money pits, and some of them were desperate to make that mortgage payment. So, I mean, I think that's what horror is about, really. Like the metaphor, and the metaphor for where we really live, for the things that make us insecure. That's why I like to write it.
That's really an excellent and informative response. Thank you.
Well, and you know what? If you pay me $1, you can, give it to other people. All right. Any other questions? Any thoughts? Yo.
Can you tell us about your first horror novel that you wrote?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's called Bloodsucker. And it was actually my first novel. It was about a vampire street kid who's not really a vampire. She's something worse. And I wrote it, I don't know, either when I was living on Albert Street or after living on Albert Street. I was basically just a destitute student going to university. So I was at like the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. And I was living on Albert Street, and I was living like literally with street people and schizophrenics and people who had problems. And there were prostitutes out, on the street corner. There was panhandlers, and I got to know all of these people. I got to know street kids. And so they kind of animated the world of Bloodsucker as just this sort of bottom of Winnipeg. And I wrote it. I got an agent. The agent couldn't sell it. I, stuck it in a drawer, and eventually it got bought by Renaissance Press a couple of years ago. So it might actually be published by them. They're a Montreal or Toronto outfit. Probably coming out late in 2026, early in 2027. That's like, on the one hand, they're reputable press, they get grants, they're recognized and stuff, but it takes so frigging long, eh? Mm-hmm. So, but I'm proud of that. I reread it not too long ago, and I thought, wow, you know what? I could really write back then. I could write up a storm. Whatever happened to me? Yeah.
You can still write, don't worry about it.
Well, I'd like to think so. I hope that I've improved, but I have no idea. I guess you'll have to read that one when it comes out. Yo.
So where do you go from here?
Oh, I don't know. I've actually got a bunch of projects that could come in line. Yeah, I have like kind of some life crisis, so I just want to get as much out as possible these days. I'm releasing up to 4 or 5 books a year. I'm emptying out my hard drive because I'm a pathological writer. Even when I quit, I'm just writing stuff. So let's see. I think I've got Swordswoman in Love, and that's a queer fantasy romance. That's actually up on Medium, chapter by chapter. I'm going to put it up on Gumroad and a couple of other places. And once it's completely published online, then I'll get a cover and do it on Amazon and do that. I've got a couple of other novels, Princess of Asylum and Empress of Asylum, that I want to do something with and find a publisher for. Another novel, The Luck. I've got something called Romance of the Undead that I want to do, sort of a vampire comedy. And, I want to do another nonfiction book, because I've got this bee in my bonnet over dictators. So, basically, butchers of the 20th century. Because the thing with dictators is everybody says, well, yeah, but they're great. No, they're all horrible human beings. They're not very smart. So, I've got tons of stuff. Yo.
Having read a bunch of your stuff, I haven't come to this conclusion before, but one of the things your work is not camp. There's no ironic distance that you have in this book. And I'm wondering, is that a decision or just who you are? You don't you put these people with like the vampire has in this book has very real and trenchant things to say about what the world is. She's not a campy Dracula figure, or even all that glamorous. She has these abilities, but they're just things she does. And I'm wondering if that's a decision of yours, or it's just who you are and what you write.
I think it's probably who I am and what I write. I think that every character that I write on some level believes in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that you have to believe in the characters that you do. If you don't believe in the characters that you write, then why are you writing them?
Well, people who write camp would say something else.
This is true. I think maybe sometimes I do, but it's hard to say. I think it's just more affecting if you've got a character who's committed to where they are, even if they're completely wrong. In Drunk Slutty Elf, I've got a character who's an alcoholic, who's the worst thief in the world, who is completely narcissistic, who has no friends, and yet she blunders through life with perfect confidence. That's kind of how it goes. Yeah. Now, I think we've had a lot of questions. I'm going to just kind of wrap up. If anybody wants to take a look at the books, feel free, go right ahead. And if anybody wants to buy one, well, I would be so flattered, I would even sign it. Mm-hmm. So, thank you very much, and happy to chat. And, of course, once again, Vindy's.
Let's give it a round of applause.